The dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight that pierced through the crack in the cave ceiling. Draventher watched them spiral and twist, much like his thoughts had done for the past 2 centuries. 3,000 years was a long time to exist, and lately he had begun to wonder if existence without purpose was worth continuing. His scales, once brilliant crimson that caught light like polished rubies, had dulled to the color of old brick. Not from age, but from neglect. What point was there in maintaining appearances when no one came to see him anymore? The last visitor had been a lost shepherd boy, and that was before the current governor's grandmother was born. The valley below had changed beyond recognition. Where once stood simple villages of wood and stone, now rose towers of metal and glass. Flying vehicles zipped between buildings, and at night the whole settlement glowed with artificial light. The people down there had their machines, their computers, their weather prediction systems. They had no need for an ancient dragon who used to warn them of coming storms or defend them from the massive rock bears that once roamed these mountains. Draventher shifted his massive bulk, and several gold coins from a long-dead kingdom clattered across the cave floor. He did not bother to gather them back into a neat pile. What did treasure matter when there was no one to protect it from? No brave knights came seeking glory anymore. No scholars climbed the mountain paths to ask for his wisdom. The children in the valley probably thought dragons were nothing more than stories parents told at bedtime. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the feeling of being needed, of villagers bringing offerings of cattle and asking for his blessing before planting season, of young warriors seeking his counsel before battles, of simply mattering to someone. Anyone to sound made his eyes snap open. Footsteps, small ones, but deliberate. Someone was climbing the path to his cave that Draventher's heart, which had beaten slowly and steadily for millennia, suddenly picked up pace. Visitors meant trouble or opportunity, and he could not decide which possibility excited him more after so long alone. He raised his head, listening carefully. The footsteps paused at the cave entrance. Then a voice called out, surprisingly steady despite the obvious nervousness behind it. "Hello, is anyone here? I mean, is any dragon here?" A female voice, young by the sound of it. Draventher considered remaining silent, pretending the cave was empty. But curiosity won over caution. He had not spoken to another living soul in so long that his voice came out as a dusty rumble. "Who dares disturb my solitude?" He heard a sharp intake of breath. Then the footsteps resumed, coming deeper into the cave. The dragon watched as a figure emerged from the shadows near the entrance. She was small, even by human standards, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style. She wore sturdy climbing clothes and carried a pack that looked heavy with equipment. But what caught his attention most were her eyes. They were bright with wonder, not fear. "My name is Rachel," she said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I'm a researcher from Earth. I've been studying the old murals in the abandoned shrines down in the valley, and they all show a great red dragon who protected this region." "That's you, isn't it?" Draventher snorted, sending up a small cloud of dust. "I was red once. Now I'm merely old. The valley no longer requires protection from the likes of me. They have their weapons and their technology." Rachel took a few steps closer, her eyes scanning the cave walls covered in ancient tapestries and shelves carved into rock holding artifacts from civilizations the valley had forgotten. "The murals show you doing more than just fighting. They show you teaching, guiding, and helping people understand the land. That kind of knowledge doesn't become obsolete, does it not?" The dragon's voice carried centuries of bitterness. When I tried to warn them about the black leaf blight 20 years ago, they laughed and said their scientists would handle it with chemicals. Half their crops died anyway because they refused to rotate fields as I had taught their ancestors. When I mentioned the migration pattern of storm clouds, they pointed to their computer models. They do not want ancient wisdom. They want data and algorithms. Rachel pulled out a small device and tapped it a few times. "Is that why no one speaks of you anymore? Because you stopped trying to help?" "I stopped because I was not wanted," Draventher said, his voice quiet now. "There is a difference between being unneeded and being unwanted. I could have borne being unneeded if they had still valued what I represented. But they look at me, at my kind, as relics of a primitive past they are embarrassed to acknowledge. The human woman was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those thoughtful eyes. Then she sat down on a fallen pillar, uninvited but not unwelcome. On Earth, we did the same thing, she said softly. We built our cities and our technology, and we forgot the people who understood the old ways. The ones who could read weather and the behavior of birds, or knew which plants could heal which sicknesses. We called them superstitious and backward. And then we wondered why we felt so disconnected from everything, so lost despite all our progress. Draventher tilted his great head, studying her. Why did you come here, human? What do you want from a forgotten dragon? Rachel met his gaze without flinching. I came because forgotten doesn't mean worthless. I came because maybe, just maybe, the valley needs you more than they realize. And maybe you need to remember that being needed isn't about recognition. It's about having something valuable to give, whether anyone asks for it or not. For the first time in 200 years, something stirred in Draventher's chest that felt almost like hope. 3 weeks had passed since Rachel's first visit, and she had returned every few days. Draventher found himself actually looking forward to her arrival, though he would never admit it aloud. She brought recording equipment and asked endless questions about the history of Ashvale, taking notes on everything from ancient weather patterns to the medicinal properties of mountain herbs that modern medicine had dismissed as folklore. Today, she arrived carrying 2 steaming containers. I brought lunch, she announced, settling onto her usual spot on the fallen pillar. I figured even dragons might appreciate hot soup. Draventher rumbled with amusement. I have not eaten soup in 800 years. I typically prefer my meals less liquid. Well, this one has meat in it, Rachel offered, opening one container. The smell of spiced broth filled the cave, and despite himself, the dragon found it pleasant. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, Rachel with her soup and Draventher with a haunch of mountain goat he had hunted the previous day. The human had a gift for making silence feel natural rather than awkward. I spoke with some of the settlement engineers yesterday, Rachel said eventually, wiping her mouth with a cloth. I mentioned some of the geological patterns you told me about. They were not very receptive. I could have predicted that, Draventher said dryly. One of them was interested, though, a younger man named Owen. He actually listened when I explained your observations about the seismic patterns in the northern ranges. She pulled out her device, showing him graphs and charts. He's been noticing irregularities that don't match their computer models. The readings have been getting stronger over the past month. Draventher moved closer, studying the data with ancient eyes that had seen patterns repeat across millennia. His blood went cold. When did these readings begin? About 6 weeks ago. Why? Do you recognize something? The dragon was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing back through centuries of memories. Every 800 years, the northern volcanic range undergoes a major eruption. The last one occurred 794 years ago, before the current settlements existed. I was young then, barely 500 years old, but I remember it clearly. The valley was nearly destroyed. Rachel's face went pale. That means we're right at the 800-year mark. Indeed, the signs are all there. The tremors will increase in frequency over the next 2 weeks. Then toxic gas vents will open in 3 specific locations. He used his claw to draw in the dirt floor of his cave, marking the spots with precision. The eruption itself will follow within days of the vents appearing. Pyroclastic flows will fill the valley. We have to warn them, Rachel said, already standing. 20,000 people live in that settlement. They will not listen. Draventher's voice was heavy with certainty. Why would they believe an old dragon when they have their sophisticated monitoring systems? Because people's lives are at stake. Rachel's voice was fierce now. I don't care if they laugh at us or call us crazy. We have to try. The dragon studied her, this small human who had somehow reignited something in him he thought long dead. Purpose. Determination. The belief that doing the right thing mattered regardless of the response. He had forgotten what that felt like. Very well, he said slowly. I will come down from my mountain. But do not expect gratitude, Rachel of Earth. Expect mockery and dismissal. I'll take that over 20,000 deaths, she replied. 2 days later, Draventher descended from his mountain for the first time in decades. The sensation of flying over the valley with actual purpose filled him with emotions he could not name. Rachel and Owen had arranged a meeting with settlement authorities, though they had not mentioned they would be bringing a dragon. The reaction was predictable. Screams erupted as his massive form landed in the central plaza. Security forces scrambled, raising weapons. Parents grabbed children and ran. Governor Rhodes emerged from the administrative building, his face red with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he shouted. "Get that creature away from my settlement." "His name is Draventher," Rachel said, stepping forward with Owen beside her. "And he's here to warn you about a volcanic event that will destroy this valley in less than 2 weeks." The governor stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Based on what evidence?" "Some ancient superstition." Draventher spoke then, his voice carrying across the plaza with authority that made people stop and listen despite their fear. "Based on 3,000 years of observation. Based on the fact that I was here the last time it happened. Based on knowledge your sensors cannot access because they have only existed for 50 years and this cycle takes 800. He explained the pattern in detail, describing exactly what would happen and when. He showed them the locations where events would appear, using his knowledge of the underground lava channels that no survey had ever mapped. He spoke with the certainty of someone who had witnessed the pattern before. Governor Rhodes listened with growing impatience. "Our monitoring systems show no imminent volcanic threat. We have seismic sensors, gas detectors, and satellite imaging. If there was a real danger, we would know about it." "Your sensors have a blind spot in the northern ranges," Owen interjected. "I've been reviewing the data, and we're not monitoring the exact area where Draventher says the eruption will originate. So your solution is to evacuate 20,000 people, shut down all operations, and cost us millions in lost productivity because an old myth told you a story?" The governor's voice dripped with scorn. "I think not. This meeting is over." As security forces moved to escort them out, Draventher locked eyes with the governor. "When events open, remember this moment. Remember that you chose pride over prudence." He spread his wings and took flight, leaving Rachel and Owen standing in the plaza as crowds whispered and pointed. The dragon returned to his mountain, the bitter taste of rejection familiar on his tongue. Perhaps he had been right all along. The world had moved on without him. 9 days had passed since the disastrous meeting with Governor Rhodes. Draventher spent his time watching the valley through a gap in his cave wall, noting the increasing frequency of tremors that the settlement below seemed determined to ignore. Each small shake confirmed his predictions, yet he felt no satisfaction in being right. Being right meant people would die. Rachel had not visited in 3 days, and he found himself missing her presence more than he cared to admit. Then, on the evening of the 9th day, she appeared at his cave entrance looking exhausted and frustrated. "They threatened to revoke my research permit," she said without preamble, dropping her pack and sitting heavily on her usual spot. "The governor says I'm spreading panic and undermining public confidence in settlement safety systems." "You tried to save them," Draventher said quietly. "That is more than most would do in the face of such rejection. Trying isn't enough." Rachel's voice cracked with emotion. Owen found proof that their sensors can't detect what's happening in the northern ranges. The monitoring grid was designed for different types of seismic activity, but the governor won't even look at the data. He says trusting a dragon over modern science would make him look like a fool. The dragon moved closer, lowering his massive head so he was at her eye level. "Sometimes humans care more about appearing wise than actually being wise. It is a flaw your species has carried for as long as I have known them." "It's not just my species," Rachel said, managing a weak smile. "You hid up here for 2 centuries because you cared more about not being rejected than about trying to help." Draventher pulled back slightly, surprised by the gentle accusation. She was right, of course. He had let pride and hurt feelings keep him from even attempting to maintain contact with the changing valley below. "You are correct," he admitted. "I am guilty of the same flaw." A tremor shook the mountain, stronger than the previous ones. Dust rained from the cave ceiling, and several small rocks clattered down the walls. Rachel grabbed onto the pillar to steady herself. When it passed, she looked at the dragon with fear in her eyes. "How long?" "The vents will open within 2 days," Draventher said grimly. "The eruption will follow 3 to 4 days after that. We have less than a week total." Rachel stood abruptly, pacing the cave floor. "Owen and some of the younger engineers believe us. They've been quietly moving their families to higher ground outside the valley. But that's maybe 300 people out of 20,000. We can't just let everyone else die. What would you have me do?" The dragon's voice carried the weight of centuries of futility. "I warned them. They rejected the warning. I cannot force them to evacuate." "No, but we can save as many as will listen." Rachel stopped pacing and looked directly at him. "Owen says the community center in the Eastern District has been organizing emergency preparation meetings. People who don't trust the governor's dismissal of the risks. There are almost 2,000 people involved. If you spoke to them directly, showed them the evidence, explained what you've seen before, maybe they would evacuate themselves. And if the governor tries to stop me, then we'll deal with that when it happens." Rachel's jaw was set with determination. "I didn't come to this planet to watch people die because of bureaucratic stubbornness. And I don't think you've lived 3,000 years just to hide in a cave while a preventable tragedy unfolds." Draventher was silent for a long moment, memories of the last eruption flooding back. He remembered the screams, the pyroclastic flows racing down the mountainside faster than anything could run, the heat so intense it turned sand to glass. He remembered using his wings to shield a family of farmers, the searing pain as superheated ash scorched his scales. He remembered the guilt of not being able to save everyone. "I cannot save them all," he said quietly. "No one can save everyone," Rachel replied. "But we can save someone, and that's enough reason to try." The dragon looked at this small human who had somehow convinced him that maturing was not about being appreciated, but about doing what was right regardless of recognition. She had reignited something in him that he thought had died long ago. Not just purpose, but the courage to act on it even in the face of certain rejection. "Very well," he said, rising to his full height. "Tell Owen to gather these people who will listen. I will speak to them tomorrow night." Rachel's face lit up with hope. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Even if we convince 2,000 to evacuate, that leaves 18,000 who will not. The weight of that failure will be heavy to carry." "Maybe," Rachel said, shouldering her pack to leave. "But carrying the weight of trying and failing is lighter than carrying the weight of never trying at all. My grandmother used to say that. She was a doctor who worked in war zones. She couldn't save everyone, but she saved who she could, and she slept better for it than those who stayed home, because saving everyone was impossible." After she left, Draventher stood at the cave entrance and watched the settlement lights below. Somewhere down there, families were going about their evening routines, unaware that their world was about to end. Children were being tucked into bed. Couples were sharing meals. People were making plans for next week, next month, next year. He could not save them all. But Rachel was right. He had to try to save some. That was what being a guardian meant. It had never been about being thanked or appreciated. It had been about standing between the innocent and the danger, even when the innocent did not believe the danger was real. The old dragon spread his wings, testing them in preparation for the flight tomorrow. He would speak to the people who would listen. He would do what he could, and if the governor tried to stop him, well, Draventher had not survived 3,000 years by being easy to intimidate. The community center in the Eastern District was packed beyond capacity. Over 3,000 people had shown up, far more than Owen had anticipated. They spilled out into the surrounding plaza. Families with children, elderly couples, young workers who had heard whispers of danger and chose to listen rather than trust official denials. Draventher circled overhead once before landing, giving people time to process his presence. The reaction was mixed. Some gasped in wonder, others grabbed their children protectively, but no one ran screaming. These were people who had come specifically to hear what the dragon had to say. Owen stood on a raised platform, his voice amplified by portable speakers. "Thank you all for coming. I know many of you have faced criticism and mockery for being here. Governor Rhodes has made it clear he considers this gathering foolish. But I ask you to listen with open minds to someone who has witnessed patterns we cannot access through our technology. Draventher landed in the plaza with surprising gentleness for something his size. The crowd pressed back but held their ground. He could see fear in their faces, but also curiosity and, in some, desperate hope. "I am Draventher," he began, his voice carrying without need for amplification. 3,000 years ago, I made a promise to the first settlers of this valley. I promised to guard them against dangers they could not foresee. For centuries, I kept that promise. Then you built your machines and decided you no longer needed guardians. I accepted this and withdrew. He paused, looking across the sea of faces. But some promises do not end simply because they are no longer wanted. 800 years ago, I witnessed an eruption from the northern volcanic range that nearly destroyed all life in this valley. I was young then, and I could only save a fraction of those in danger. I have carried that failure for 8 centuries. A woman in the crowd called out, "How do we know you're telling the truth? Our sensors show no major threat." "Your sensors have a blind spot," Owen interjected, pulling up holographic displays showing the monitoring grid. "We've been analyzing the placement of seismic detectors. They're optimized for the types of tectonic activity common to this region, but not for volcanic events originating from the northern range. Draventher is describing activity in an area we're essentially blind to. The signs are already visible," Draventher continued. "The tremors you have been experiencing are increasing in frequency and intensity. In less than 48 hours, toxic gas vents will open." He used his claw to mark a holographic map, Owen projected. "Here, here, and here. These locations are based on underground lava channels that form naturally in this type of geology. Your surveys have never mapped them because they have never looked." An elderly man pushed forward. "I remember my grandfather's stories. He spoke of a great dragon who warned of dangers. Stories from before the founding of this settlement. We thought they were myths. Myths often contain truth buried beneath time," Draventher said gently. "Your grandfather's grandfather may have been among those I helped save 8 centuries ago. The stories were real. The danger is real. And it is coming again." Rachel stepped onto the platform beside Owen. "I've spent the past month documenting Draventher's knowledge. The geological patterns he describes are consistent with volcanic cycles. The timeline matches perfectly. We have maybe 6 days before the pyroclastic flows reach this valley. Anyone still here when that happens will die." A young mother holding a child spoke up, her voice shaking. "But Governor Rhodes says evacuating is unnecessary. He says trusting ancient superstition over modern science is ridiculous. If we leave and nothing happens, we'll lose our jobs, our homes, everything. If you stay and something does happen, you'll lose your lives," Draventher replied. "I cannot force you to choose. I can only tell you what I know, what I have seen before. What the evidence shows is coming again. Why should we trust you?" Another voice called. "You abandoned us generations ago. Where have you been while our settlements grew?" The question struck deep, and Draventher did not shy from it. "I withdrew because I was no longer wanted. Because every offer of help was rejected, every warning dismissed, every piece of wisdom called superstition. I let my hurt feelings matter more than my duty as a guardian. That was wrong. I was wrong." His voice grew stronger. "But I am here now, not because I expect gratitude or recognition, not because I want to prove the governor wrong. I am here because knowing danger is coming and doing nothing would make me complicit in what follows. I am here because being a guardian is not a job you retire from when it becomes unpleasant. It is who you are, who you choose to be, regardless of whether anyone appreciates it." Silence fell over the plaza. Then the elderly man spoke again. "I believe him. My family will evacuate tonight." "Mine too," said the young mother. More voices joined, families making the decision to trust ancient wisdom over official reassurance. Not everyone, perhaps not even most, but enough. Owen began coordinating evacuation routes to safer ground in the eastern highlands where they had been stockpiling supplies. As the crowd began to disperse, planning and packing, Governor Rhodes arrived with security forces. His face was purple with rage. "You are in violation of emergency ordinances," he shouted at Owen and Rachel, "inciting panic, unauthorized gatherings, and spreading false information. You are both under arrest." Draventher moved between the governor and the two humans, his massive form creating a physical barrier. They told the truth. You rejected it out of pride. When the vents open tomorrow, when the gases begin killing those too close to breathe them, you will remember this moment. You will remember that you had the chance to save them. "Get out of my settlement," Rhodes spat. "Take your fear-mongering followers and go. When nothing happens, when your predictions prove false, I'll make sure everyone knows what fools you are." "I hope you are right," Draventher said quietly. "I truly do. But I have lived long enough to know that hope is not a strategy." The dragon spread his wings, and Rachel and Owen climbed onto his back. As they flew toward the Eastern Highlands, Draventher looked back at the settlement below, at the lights and the lives continuing as if nothing was wrong. He had saved 3,000. 17,000 remained, trusting technology over testimony, pride over prudence. The weight of what was coming settled on his ancient shoulders like a physical burden. 38 hours after the community center meeting, the first gas vent opened exactly where Draventher had predicted. It was a maintenance worker who discovered it, checking underground utility lines in the northern industrial sector. He collapsed within minutes, overcome by toxic fumes. Two others who went to help him fell unconscious as well. Emergency responders arrived, wearing protective gear, and found all three dead. By noon, the second vent had opened near the agricultural district. This time people knew to stay back, but the crops in a 5-acre zone withered and died within an hour, leaves turning black as if burned. The acrid smell of sulfur dioxide filled the air. Governor Rhodes held an emergency press conference, his confident demeanor from 2 days ago completely gone. "We are experiencing unexpected volcanic activity. The situation is under control. Residents in affected areas should relocate to the northern districts temporarily while we assess the threat level." "The northern districts are exactly where the eruption will occur," Rachel said, watching the broadcast from the evacuee camp in the Eastern Highlands. The camp now held nearly 4,000 people, with more arriving every hour as Rhodes's reassurances rang increasingly hollow. Owen was coordinating with the volunteers, organizing shelter, food distribution, and medical supplies. "He's going to get people killed by moving them north. Someone needs to tell him." "I will go," Draventher said, though the thought of facing Rhodes again filled him with dread. Not fear of the governor himself, but fear of being dismissed again while lives hung in balance. Still, he had to try it out. He flew back to the settlement and landed in the central plaza, drawing immediate attention. Rhodes emerged from the administrative building, flanked by security. "You," the governor said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "This is your fault. Your fear-mongering caused mass hysteria that prevented proper evacuation procedures. I told you exactly what would happen and when," Draventher replied calmly. "The vents opened where I said they would. The third will appear within the next 12 hours near the water treatment facility. After that, you have perhaps 3 days before the eruption itself. Do not move people north. That is directly in the path of the pyroclastic flows. Move them east or south to higher ground. I don't take orders from creatures of legend." Rhodes snapped, but his voice wavered. "Our seismic teams are analyzing the situation." "Your seismic teams do not have 3,000 years of observation," the dragon said. "Please, set aside your pride. I take no pleasure in being right. I want only to help save as many as possible." For a moment, Rhodes seemed to waver. Then one of his advisors whispered something in his ear, and his expression hardened. "The northern relocation continues. We have reinforced bunkers there that can withstand any volcanic event. Your eastern camp has no such protection." Draventher felt ancient rage building in his chest. Those bunkers were designed for radiation events from the old wars, not pyroclastic flows that reach temperatures of 700 degrees. The superheated gas will find every vent, every crack. It will cook everyone inside alive. "This conversation is over," Rhodes declared. "If you truly want to help, Stop interfering with official evacuation procedures. The dragon left, his heart heavy. He returned to the refugee camp and told Rachel and Owen what had happened. They stood in grim silence, watching as transport vehicles below moved people north towards safety that was actually certain death. "We have to do something," Rachel said desperately. "We can't just watch." "What can we do?" Owen asked. "Rhodes has legal authority. If we physically interfere, we'll be arrested and help no one." Draventher looked at the mountain of supplies they had gathered. Food, water, medical equipment, shelter materials. Enough for maybe 5,000 people if rationed carefully. Not enough for 17,000. "We prepare for what comes after," he said quietly. "When the eruption begins, those who survive the initial blast will need somewhere to go. We make sure this camp can receive them." The third vent opened 9 hours later, right on schedule. It erupted through the foundation of the water treatment facility, sending toxic gases through the building's ventilation system. 12 workers died before anyone realized what was happening. The facility had to be evacuated, cutting water supply to half the settlement. That finally broke through Rhodes's denial. He issued a general evacuation order, but insisted people move to the northern bunkers as planned. Some complied, trusting official guidance. Others, seeing the pattern Draventher had predicted coming true with terrifying accuracy, broke away and headed east toward the Dragon's camp. By nightfall, the refugee camp held 8,000 people. More arrived every hour, families carrying what belongings they could manage, children crying, elderly struggling with the climb to higher ground. Draventher flew shuttle runs, carrying those too weak or injured to make the journey on foot. That on one flight, he spotted a group trapped by a new fissure that had opened across the main road east. Without hesitation, he landed and loaded 37 people onto his back, making 2 trips to get them all to safety. A young girl, no more than 7, clung to his neck scales and whispered, "Thank you, Dragon Sir." Something in those simple words cracked open emotions Draventher had kept locked away for centuries. He was needed, not as a symbol or a legend, but as a living being who could make a difference through direct action. The acknowledgement was nice, but what truly mattered was the doing, the helping, the standing between innocent people and disaster. The seismic monitors showed increasing activity in the northern range. Owen's equipment, positioned strategically based on Draventher's guidance, picked up magma movement deep underground. The models all pointed to the same conclusion. 72 hours, Owen said grimly. Maybe less. Rachel looked at the camp, at the 8,000 faces lit by emergency lights. And there are still thousands in the settlement. Thousands more in the northern bunkers. "Then we work through the night," Draventher said. "We save who we can." He spread his wings and took flight again, heading back toward the settlement. There was still time. Not much, but some. And while time remained, he would use it. That was what Guardians did. The eruption began at dawn on the third day. Not with a bang, but with a low rumble that vibrated through the mountain stone like the planet itself was growling. Draventher, who had not slept in 48 hours, felt it in his bones and knew immediately what it meant. "It has begun," he told Rachel and Owen. "The major eruption will follow within hours. Everyone in the valley must evacuate now." He took flight even as he spoke, diving toward the settlement below. The streets were already filling with panicked people. Many had finally stopped trusting official reassurances after the 3 vents appeared exactly as predicted. Others were fleeing simply because the rumbling was too ominous to ignore. But thousands were still in the northern bunkers, following Governor Rhodes's evacuation plan. Draventher flew there first, landing outside the reinforced entrance where security guards still stood post. "Open these doors," he commanded. "Get everyone out and moving east of the highlands. You have perhaps 3 hours." The guards looked uncertain. One spoke into a radio, presumably communicating with Rhodes. The response made him shake his head. "Governor's orders are to remain in the bunkers. They're designed to withstand catastrophic events." "Not this one," Draventher said. "The pyroclastic flows will superheat these bunkers into ovens. Everyone inside will die in agony. Please, I am begging you, open the doors." The guards still hesitated. Then a massive tremor shook the ground, strong enough to crack pavement. In the distance, a plume of ash and smoke began rising from the northern range. That finally broke their resolve. They opened the bunker doors. People poured out, confused and frightened. Draventher began directing them east, using his size and voice to organize the chaos. Move quickly but carefully. Stay together. Help those who need it. He flew back and forth, carrying those who could not walk fast enough, shuttling the elderly and injured to safety. His wings ached, his muscles burned, but he pushed through the pain. This was what he had been made for, what his size and strength and 3,000 years of experience had prepared him for. Rachel appeared on a transport vehicle, coordinating ground evacuation efforts. Owen had set up relay stations along the route to higher ground, providing water and rest stops. The refugee camp, now holding over 12,000 people, prepared to receive thousands more. Governor Rhodes finally emerged from the administrative building, his face ashen as he watched the ash plume growing larger by the minute. He saw Draventher landing to pick up another group of elderly residents and approached him. "I should have listened," Rhodes said quietly, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "How many will die because of my pride?" "I do not know," Draventher replied honestly. "But we are not finished yet. Help me evacuate the southern residential district. There are families there who cannot make it out on their own." Rhodes nodded and began issuing orders to security forces, directing them to assist rather than control. It was too late for many things, but not too late to help. The eruption reached its peak 2 hours later. The northern mountain range exploded with violence that made the ground shake 20 miles away. A wall of superheated gas and ash began racing down the valley, moving faster than anything alive could run. Draventher was making what he knew would be his final trip back to the settlement when he spotted them. A care facility for the elderly, somehow forgotten in the chaos of evacuation. Through the windows, he could see dozens of people in beds, those too sick or injured to flee on their own. The pyroclastic flow was coming. He had perhaps 5 minutes. The dragon crashed through the facility's roof rather than waste time with doors. "Everyone who can help. Carry those who cannot," he roared. Now, staff members, who had been trying desperately to move residents themselves, sprang into action. Draventher loaded his back with as many people as he could safely carry, while staff members grabbed others. He took flight, feeling the superheated wind at his tail, and flew towards safety. Behind him, the care facility vanished in a wall of ash and fire. He had gotten them out with perhaps 30 seconds to spare. He made the landing at the refugee camp and collapsed from exhaustion, dozens of rescued elderly sliding carefully from his back into waiting arms of medical volunteers. Rachel ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she said. "You saved them." "Not all of them," Draventher panted. "Never all of them." The valley below was gone, buried under volcanic debris and ash. The settlement, built with such pride and technology, had vanished as if it never existed. But as the dragon looked at the camp around him, he saw over 16,000 faces. Families reunited. Children playing despite the trauma. Elderly residents from the care facility being tended to with gentle care. Governor Rhodes approached, his expensive suit covered in ash. 19,417 people were evacuated. "We lost approximately 3,683 who stayed behind or could not be reached in time." His voice broke. "Those deaths are my responsibility. They are shared by all of us who could have done more, should have done better," Draventher said quietly. "But you helped save 19,000. That matters too." Over the following weeks, the survivors began rebuilding in a location Draventher helped them choose, away from volcanic risks. They asked him to stay, to serve as a formal advisor and guardian. A group of young people, including several who had been on his back during evacuation, asked to study under him, learning to read the land and understand patterns that technology alone might miss. Rachel continued documenting his knowledge, but now with dozens of eager students joining her. Owen designed new monitoring systems that integrated both modern sensors and ancient wisdom about geological patterns. The old dragon, who had believed the world had moved on without him, discovered something profound. Purpose was not granted by others or taken away by time. It existed in the choice to stand and act when action was needed. The world did not need myths or legends. It needed guardians willing to do what was right regardless of recognition. That a child approached one evening and asked, "Will you tell us stories about the old days?" Draventher, scales gleaming in firelight as his strength returned, smiled and began to speak. He was needed after all.